So first of all, I'm really glad folks are here. I've done lots of like little technology chats this week, which are all really fun and give me a chance to represent my community. But this talk is a little bit different. This is more with like my incubation building community hat on. And so it's nice to do one of these community building topics. And this is specifically kind of focused at the project teams that are starting to encounter like security vulnerabilities and regulation. I'm going to be taking examples from GeoServer and GeoTools, some projects I'm involved in, and how we've chosen to respond to this challenge. And I'm hoping to be kind of like embarrassing on behalf of, voicing some of the challenges so that other people feel a little bit less awkward about sticking up their hand and saying, hey, I need help, or my government is crazy, or things like that. So this talk is approaching security with kindness and compassion. So I had a really nice intro. The other person who's up here is Yvonne, who's a little bit more of a software library advocate, and he's done this presentation with me before at FOSS4G Europe. And he's a really nice guy, so I left his face up here, but I'm really sorry he's not here in person to entertain you. I'm also here as behalf of my employer, GeoCat Canada, and we package up many open source technologies to make up our products and support our customers, and we employ software leaders from around the world in order to give our customers excellent support. I'm from the office in Canada, Victoria, about as close to New Zealand as you could get and still be in Canada, which means I get to explain a little bit of Canadiana to you. So you might know Canadians have a reputation of being polite, for which I apologize. So the classic one is the Canadian walks in and like bumps into something and apologizes to a chair. And like there's the idea of a Canadian standoff. I've literally seen this occur where two Canadians are on a bus and they're like, you go, and then the bus driver gives up and drives on to the next stop. So that's a Canadian standoff. So I just need to explain a little bit that the I'm sorry has a graduation of meanings, which we'll explore today. So the very first one that we're going to cover here is I said publicly, I don't care about CVEs, and that traumatized people and upset people. And I really wanted to say that I just don't want to emphasize the security stuff and scare people and dissuade people from using my software. I actually care about actually fixing the problems and solving them. And then we have this difficulty where if there's a vulnerability, people demand a fix or they will like embarrass us publicly. So this kind of comes across as a bit of an entitled move. At the very least, it's a poor community interaction, and it doesn't actually follow our security policy for our project. The big fundamental challenge is it assumes a product-vendor relationship rather than a community relationship. And so yeah, like this is the first I'm sorry. So I'm sorry we're having this misunderstanding, and perhaps if I say the word slower and more carefully, you'll understand me. So that's the level 1 on the Canadian I'm sorry scale. So I do care about communication, and I'm sorry, I'm willing to try again. Here's, just for background, how vulnerabilities are reported. A researcher or someone who's found the problem comes in, and they go, the world's on fire, and they go to their local authority, be it a not-for-profit or the Dutch Institute, or there's a Spanish national agency there, and they say, hey, I have a vulnerability report. They talk to their common numbering authority, and they are given a little common vulnerability and exploit number, which goes into a database that's distributed around the world so that they can share this software has this problem, and it's a tool for communicating vulnerabilities around the world. So this goes out into a published list which is shared worldwide across boundaries. So here's an example of arguing with the Spanish National Authority. So this was the numbering authority coming to us and saying, hey, you've got a couple months to fix this now before we're going to do an automatic disclosure. And that's a violation of our security policy. And the trouble is we wanted to talk to the actual reporter. Are they a member of our community? Are they working on behalf of someone else who wants to fix? Do they even want to fix? Maybe they're just trying to report it to be nice. And the interaction that was set up was a hostile one. And yeah, they were treating us like a non-cooperative vendor that they needed to like threaten to get action out of. So threatening, no communication with the original person, and an impasse. So this really like was a tension. And it comes from a couple things. Often the reporters need to get one of those CVE numbers to get paid. So they're charged with finding problems. They find a few, they get a little number to say, hey, you're done your job, and they can collect a check. The authority needs to get the problems fixed. And these policies are set up for the public safety because vulnerabilities have an impact on society. So like, I totally get where everyone's coming from. And you know, once again, I'm sorry that we're trapped in this discussion, and like I've had a chance to listen to you. We're now on more equal terms. So in this case, first one is, I'm sorry you're not understanding me. Second one is, oh, I'm sorry I didn't understand you. So this is where we get to another Canadian expression, eh? So if people familiar, have you ever heard a Canadian say, eh? This is a chance like to insert a break in the conversation to make sure that whoever you're talking with is keeping up. Like maybe I'm talking too fast, like do you have anything to input? It's a check-in on the conversation. If the person nods, you go ahead, and if the person has something to offer, you have a chance to listen. So this is the section where I would pause and hand the microphone over to my colleague from Europe to talk a little bit about what is happening. So in the larger picture, where vulnerabilities cause significant disruption to society, there was a recent one about Log4j logging that cost, you know, Europe $300 million and so on. There's an increasing pressure from the governments around the world to regulate the software industry. So in the United States, they're coming up with the requirement to have a software bill of materials. If you're running something, tell us what's in there so we can check to see if there's any vulnerabilities. And Europe has a much more extensive response called the Cyber Resiliency Act. Now, who has ever visited a website and it says, cookies, be afraid, and there's a little button to dismiss that? That is thanks to European law affecting everybody worldwide. So if the website does business in Europe, can be accessed from someone in Europe, they're willing to go out around the world and sue people that don't respect European privacy laws. So this means that even though this is a European law, it actually affects software development worldwide and affects our open source projects worldwide. So Yvonne is a little bit of an advocate, and so he has a response. He's been very careful in talking with the legislatures, and he would like us to be a little bit calm. So don't do a bad job of security. Have a list of your dependencies. That's that software nutritional label, the software bill of materials. Have some kind of vulnerability policy. And the scary one for me is inform ENISA, which is some European group, that there is a problem. So there's some requirement to inform these bureaucrats, you know, within 24 hours or 48 hours or something. They also want you to fix the vulnerability before and above adding new features. So that's an interesting one. It's what you would like to do if you've got money and project capacity. And the other one is just to offer updates to your software. So having a vulnerability, having a fix, but no like release plan for the next update is not so good for society. So yeah, we're getting an increasing, the world is starting to regulate the software industry, and open source is getting caught up in that. So here's an example from the curl project. Who here has used curl? Anyone? A couple people. And how they've chosen to respond to a CRA request. The request comes in and says, hey, please respond to this table very succinctly and tell us, you know, if your software is vulnerable. And the response is, you know, that's great. I'm happy to respond to your table the moment you've set up a vendor relationship here. So the moment you set up a support contract, we'll be able to tell you how to what's going on. And I look forward to future collaboration. This is nice and clear. It immediately established that there's no vendor relationship to draw on. So that's one example. We've updated our GeoServer security policy. So once again, following the curl example, you notice that we had a problem where the Spanish authority reported a problem and had a little version number, CVE, and then we had no control of when they were going to publish. So curl decided to be a numbering authority so that they could hand out the version numbers and set their own schedule for disclosure. We had a choice for GeoServer. Right now we're using GitHub Security Advisory Database. The alternative was asking OSGeo to operate as a numbering authority. So yeah, whatever happened to that Spanish report? So we did eventually get a hold of the researcher, who was nice, and they made a fix, a documentation fix, telling you how to configure GeoServer to avoid this vulnerability. And once that fix is available in the stable and maintenance release, we published it. And then the moment we did, they complained that it was only a documentation fix. So once again, I'm sorry. And in this case, sorry means, oh, I'm sorry, I'm trapped in this conversation with you and I don't quite know how to get out. So this was the GZIP where we did our proposal. We changed from a responsible disclosure to the keyword coordinated vulnerability disclosure. And no change to the rest of our procedure. We want to make sure the stable and maintenance releases have a fix before we talk about it publicly. One thing that was interesting here, especially for regulation, we need to make sure that all our vendors, such as GeoCat, have an opportunity to meet this Cyber Resiliency Act legislation. So it sets up a way for the vendors to pay with time, such as me volunteering, or pay with money. Please be a GeoCat customer. So we need to make sure that there's a line of communication that respects the trust that's associated with handling this very sensitive information. So earning the trust to access like the GeoServer security vulnerability email list is a level above just getting commit access. We really have to be careful with this information. So, we just added the option to report via the vulnerability database here, and we changed the name to Coordinate Vulnerability Disclosure. And we also updated our developer guide with some guidance. If it's a public issue, we close it and send a link to the policy. If it's a public email, it's a similar thing, a private email. No need to embarrass someone publicly. A private email, invite them to talk to us. Social media, that one's really tough if someone's calling out a problem on social media. And if it's a public CVE that they've reported to another agency, we've got very little options. They usually have a procedure to formally dispute. I've never been able to successfully use that one yet. So here's our initial test with the GeoServer log file path traversal vulnerability. So the Spanish person was able to adjust the UI parameters and read the password file. Or we actually, even with this vulnerability today, because it's only a documentation fix, we get a couple reports about this problem every year. Yeah. So here's the documentation fix. So this is part of the CV where we say, if you lock down this setting with an environment variable or property file, then it can't be configured from the user interface. And that's a perfectly good mitigation. And here's the documentation change they made where they say, login configuration hardening, please set this location. And if you do set it, it'll take precedence over what's in the user interface. So that was enough to patch the problem. So yeah, that was a trial test. Now we're going to talk about testing with fire. So this was our first really serious vulnerability we've had in some years, and it was interesting. We actually got to go through our security policy and try things out. So on June 18th, we patched GeoServer for what's RCE, remote code execution. And at the end of the month, we gave people a couple weeks saying, hey, we're going to disclose this at the end of the month, please update. At the end of the month, we did our public disclosure saying this is an RCE problem. The next day, the security researchers were trying to figure out how to do auto scans to determine what was vulnerable. The day after, there was actually active exploits in the wild being shared, and the rootkit tools started to adopt the attack into their lists of thousands of ways to attack servers. July 15th, so like 2 weeks later, it made the known exploited vulnerability list, and US, departments and so on were given into August 5th to patch their systems. By September, it made the Hacker News because this vulnerability was used to do orchestrated attacks throughout the Asia-Pacific region. It's also been cited in destabilizing the Romanian elections and so on. Even though we're a little geospatial application, we do need folks to treat vulnerabilities seriously. In the past, I've had people say, wait, I just want to share information. If someone breaks into my server and steals the geodata I'm trying to give away for free, great. Sorry, the geodata is not the target. The trust within your organization is. And then even just last month, the CISA has released a little report about how people responded to this issue. So you can click on that and learn more. So yeah. So this is what urgent looks like in 2024. We released the little note saying, hey, there's a vulnerability, please update. 2 weeks later, we said, okay, we've hit the disclosure button, it's released to the CVE database, and we put a bit more information about it. So an indication of the severity to encourage people to update. Here was our feedback. Do I have to come in my weekend? You know, buddy, I'm making this release for you on my weekend. You probably have to come in on your weekend. The CVE database was really good to notify people that wouldn't necessarily read the GeoServer blog list, but it also notified the bad actors. And it resulted in like people publicizing the exploit in tweets and so on. So a little bit of a mixed result there. We did eventually make a blog post. We really wanted to keep the CVE as a point of truth, because it's difficult with this kind of thing, having multiple rumors and information that might be out of date about what's actually going on. However, a CVE is not set up for question and answer, so we did make a blog post just to give people a heads up, and it also provided a URL to share and promote. So yeah, one thing we learned, there's no great way to contact all the GeoServer users worldwide, but the bad actors have databases with tens of thousands of GeoServers to attack. So it's a really kind of a interesting trade-off. We don't have software in the open source community that phones home, that we can send a little message to all the administrators saying, hey, please update me. And that's not something we're necessarily going to fix, but it's an interesting imbalance in knowledge. So a year later, we had another vulnerability, this time originating in the GeoTools library. This time, there was just a notice to update, because we had the feedback listing the severity only helps the attacker. So I don't feel great about that, but that's the feedback that's been given by our community. And then when it comes time for public disclosure, we list the vulnerabilities that have just been fixed. So here was the vulnerability. It was an XML entity, external entity resolver issue in XML parsing. GeoServer does a lot of XML parsing and was affected by this GeoTools problem. First reported by an AI bot in February. It made no sense, so it wouldn't talk to us to explain why this mattered. It was then reported by someone in April, who then actually took the time to explain to us why we should care and how serious this was. We made concurrent release fixes in May, and we delayed the release a little bit because we had to fix both GeoServer and GeoNetwork, which make use of the GeoTools library. And then we did our public disclosure in June. Whew. So this stuff happens. Even with our projects, we can disrupt society. So it is a long game. So prioritize the sustainability of your developers. They're who fund your project. Try and protect them from getting burnt out from these kind of requests. It is a sustainability challenge, so do not be shy about seeking sponsorship. You were also one of the people to be kind to, so I got fed up with this and had to apologize for someone and ask my project steering committee for help in responding to one of these researchers that was being, I don't know, insistent. And also, security is a team effort. So the reporter policies are set up to assume a vendor relationship, not a community. So just take a moment to remind them of that fact. So here's one where they were saying, please fix this now. It's subject to our 90-day disclosure policy. And the response is, you know, if you wish to maintain your allocated timeline, your timeline, please allocate resources to assist as a member of the community. And when a fix is not readily available, there are alternatives. So here's one. Is there a plan to get this updated? If not, we will unfortunately need to remove the software from our systems until this is resolved. Yep, that is an option. Fortunately for this particular challenge, upgrading from Spring Framework 5, there is a response, and we've done significant fundraising in order to update this library. Thank you. Do you have any questions? Anybody?
I kind of do, but I don't know if it's necessarily like a tech. Okay, here we go. It's not necessarily a technical question in the sense of what you were just showing us, but for example, in terms of like the brand credibility and stuff, how do you think this kind of public disclosure of these vulnerabilities affects, for example, GeoCat in that sense? Or do you have any kind of like communication strategy for mitigation and crisis if something like this like blows up?
We have this wonderful thing. We have this wonderful thing called a software agreement with our customers. And by participating in the open source projects, we can meet the terms of our software agreement, which includes making sure that they are patched prior to public disclosure. As a community lead, I do need to set things up so the policies are in place so that GeoCat is informed. And I missed the rest of my joke. So the rest of my scale was like, oh, I'm sorry that, you know, so I reached when I'm sorry we were at an impasse. The rest of the joke was like, oh, I'm sorry that I'm trapped in this conversation with you. And then the next one was, oh, I'm sorry you exist, and we're having this misunderstanding. And the next one on the Canadian scale is, oh, I'm sorry I exist, and we're trapped in this conversation. So as we go down the scale here for severity, you know, you get the increasing meanings of the Canadian I'm sorry expression. So Canadians are very polite. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
I actually think by having a process in place for our brand, it helps because we can actually show and prove to our customers that we fix their implementations, and that's a bit different than if you just offload from the community side. But yeah,
it shows commitment and accountability.
Yeah.
And that kind of brings me back to this slide. A lot of what the regulation is trying to establish is commitment and accountability, and as a vendor, we are accountable. You know, there's a couple anti-patterns here as a researcher, assuming people are going to fix things for you at no cost. A lawmaker really assumes software has a price and that they can start to fine people, even open source contributors, and it's awkward to set up financial consequences for our group, which is an attention economy. You drive away people's attention if they're afraid to take part. And an interesting one for developers is putting a bug bounty doesn't help. You actually just attract more attention and more AI slop as people try to make money. One thing that's interesting that comes into the sustainability challenge is the Cyber Resiliency Act has the idea of a software steward. So the Eclipse Foundation is optimistic that this will drive more investment in open source, and OSGeo is going to play this role for GeoServer. I'm unsure if it will drive more projects to join OSGeo so that OSGeo can be a software steward. So like a vendor-neutral ground, there's a procedure to allow software that's truly a collaborative effort not to be held financially accountable. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, JD.